Yeah, I'm surprised Layne is not busting the portafilter right now, pushing that down. Yeah! Hello world, welcome back to the Tailgate Coffee Table. Today I'm here with Layne Norton. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, man.
If you guys don't know, Layne is a caffeine fiend. So one of the first times I met Layne, he was competing in Austin at Powerlifting Nationals.
Yep.
And I think you had said you had consumed like 900 or 1,000 milligrams of caffeine that day.
Something like that.
And so I thought, what a perfect setting to sit down, chat with Layne, make a drink together over some caffeine, his favorite thing. Today we're gonna make what I call a cafe cola, which is Coke, espresso, and a little bit of sweet cream. So Layne, do you have a lot of experience making coffee?
I do not.
No.
I mean, I've made drip coffee. I've done pour over, and that's about the extent of my, and Keurig, and that's about the extent of my coffee making.
Yeah, so the espresso machine is new to you.
That's new,
okay,
yeah.
Sweet. Well, it's actually not that difficult to do.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna walk you through it.
Perfect.
You're gonna make the drink yourself.
Okay.
And let's just jump right into it.
Sweet.
Machine's already on. And this is called a portafilter, portable filter. Who would have thought? And you're just gonna take it and stick it right into the grinder here. So just carefully remove that and give it a couple taps here on the tailgate just to kind of get it compacted down. All right, that works.
Yep.
Next up, take this side, put it on top and give it some spins.
Oh, like this?
Do the other side first.
Other side?
Yeah, because it's got the ridges. It's ribbed for pleasure. Go right into the espresso machine until you can feel it slide up in there. Hardest part of the whole process, right here. You just hit the espresso button.
This one right here?
Yep. Espresso actually has three parts. It's got the heart, which is the bottom where it's going to contain all the like intense flavors. And in the middle is called the body. And the top is called the crema, which it has some of the oils from the coffee and it keeps all the flavor down. So that's just fun fact about espresso. Okay, so next step of our drink, take your Coke Zero, superior to Diet Coke, right? Look at that, that's a perfect pour. No fizz, no bubbles, damn.
Could have been a bartender.
All right, next up, pour the espresso on top. Oh, there's the fizz.
Sit. Oh.
That's cool. All right, so now what we're gonna do is do a splash of sweet cream.
Yep.
Hop in there, grab the cream, money shot right there. That's it. All right, dude, we got our coffee. I wanna get a taste test from you.
All right.
Let's get your taste test.
Cheers. That's nice.
It's interestingly
like,
good, right?
Yeah, it's like some body but some sweetness to it from the Coke Zero.
Yeah.
And it's like refreshing,
but not overly sweet.
No, it's not overly sweet. No, it's nice. It's refreshing, especially here in Florida where it's still like 80 degrees.
Dude, yeah. And if you had to give it a rating out of 10, just on taste, what would you give it?
I give it a solid 9.
9.
I like it.
All right, you heard that. 9 is up there. And then difficulty level out of 10, what would you say?
2.
So, but if you, okay, so say I wasn't here to walk you through it.
Okay.
And you had to figure out how to make an espresso on your own, what would you say the difficulty level would be?
Do I get access to a YouTube video or
yeah,
no?
of course.
Oh, 2. Yeah, very easy.
Easy money.
The hardest part was figuring where the things to put the...
the notches to put it in.
Yeah.
Cool. All right, dude, well, we got our coffee. Let's chat.
Sounds good.
Cheers. Welcome back to the Tailgate Coffee Table. Today, I am honored to have a very special guest that goes by the name of Layne Norton. You have probably seen him online at some point or another over the last 10, 12, since social media has begun. Whether it was the bodybuilding forums, whether it's been through Instagram, probably on Facebook, some sort of Facebook groups at some point as well. Layne has been around since the beginning.
I'm an old guy.
And he is a world record holding powerlifter, world champion powerlifter multiple times. And you've competed in bodybuilding. You also have a PhD in nutritional sciences.
Yep.
So Layne, thanks for being here, man. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Thanks for making the time and for showing me how to make espresso.
Yeah.
And that you can combine it with one of my other favorite things, Coke Zero.
Dude, yeah. It's a weird thing, some of the combinations that work out. And one of my favorite things about Layne is that he calls out all of the people spewing bullshit on the internet. And I legitimately think that's one of my favorite things that Layne does, and the way he shows up on social media.
Thanks. Not everybody's a big fan of it, but I think it's I kind of look at it as, this space is very unregulated and people can kind of just say whatever. And so I think it needs people to you know, the best way to kind of check all that is for people who know what they're talking about to come in and say, hey, no, that's not accurate, and here's why. And, you know, for a long time, it felt like I was kind of the only one doing it. And now there's like quite a few people who do it, which I'm actually happy about because I'm only one person and there's more than enough bullshit to go around. So
sure. And, you know, it does make a difference too. You know, people online can criticize people for doing whatever, but one of the first times that I met you in Austin, I bumped into you at some restaurant. And we just sat down, had a bite together, and then this random guy came up to you and he was like, "Hey, you're Layne Norton, right?" And you're like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Oh, you actually called out one of my buddies in one of your videos, and it made me change my perspective on the way that I believe in whatever it was." Yeah. And so by you doing that, you did change. You know, you opened his mind or changed his opinion or whatever it may be, but it was a positive interaction. It wasn't anything negative from my perspective. So what you're doing does have a net positive, regardless of all the stuff that people may say in your comment section, you know?
Yeah. And, you know, I've tried to evolve like the way I do things over time. Like I definitely have been somebody who's like kind of gotten emotional and, you know, probably gone a little bit too hard at certain people. Now I really try to like save my vitriol for like the most egregious offenders, you know. With everyone else, I just kind of try to focus on the claims, you know, but at the same time, it's like, if you're just giving facts, it's people tune out, you know, people want the entertainment value with it. So I try to balance, you know, being fact-based with also making it funny. And, you know, like people are like, oh, you exaggerate your facial expressions. I'm like, yeah. You know, it's because I'm trying to get eyeballs like other people are, but I'm trying to do that so that I can provide good information. And, you know, I think one of the things people don't realize is that, you know, misinformation always has some kind of harmful downstream effect, because a lot of what people say is, well, you know, this person is not trying to do this. They're not trying, or they're, you know, they mean well. And it's like, yeah, but there's the whole saying, like the path to hell is paved with good intentions, you know? Yep. So should we worry about the intention or should we worry about what the impact is, you know?
Yeah. So on that note, I wanted to talk to you about artificial sweeteners.
Yeah, let's get it.
Just because so on my page, obviously in the drinks and the recipes that I make, I use sugar-free syrup all the time. And I get people in my comment section like, this is so unhealthy for you, regardless of if it's low calorie, whatever. Yeah. And so from somebody with a PhD in nutritional sciences, I wanted to talk to you about why people, like, where does that like fear, or where has that misinformation been being spread around artificial sweeteners? Are they actually bad for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it comes from like the naturalism fallacy, right? Well, like if things are not natural, they must be bad for us. And if things are natural, they must be good for us. And, you know, I always tell people have guidelines, not rules, because rules will make you do really dumb stuff, right? Like, so if your rule is, I don't eat sugar, well, then you can't eat fruit, right? Well, we know fruit's good for you. And maybe people will argue that, but sorry, the data is pretty darn clear on it. But if your guideline is, hey, I try to avoid sugar or added sugar because it's calorie dense, whatever. Okay, well then like you're still open to not doing crazy stuff. And so I think the idea that, okay, consuming mostly whole foods, minimally processed, I think that's a good guideline, but it's not because of any magical inherent property. It's because processed foods tend to be very, very energy dense, and they tend to be relatively devoid of, you know, fiber and micronutrients and whatnot. So I think people are too quick to like throw things in a box because, I mean, I'll hear people say this about whey protein. Well, it's processed. Who cares? Like, why don't we look at the actual research data, which shows improved body composition, reduced levels of inflammation, improved insulin sensitivity, improved metabolic health. Okay, I don't really care if it's processed or not, right? Like medications are processed, right? But like people need medications for certain things. And so I think people just get really hung up on the minutia of, or not the minutia, but dig in too far into a rule, right? So I tell people have guidelines, not rules. As far as artificial sweeteners go, and we really should say non-nutritive sweeteners, because, you know, stevia is technically natural. But for the most part, we're, aspartame, sucralose, saccharin. One of the first things I'll say to people is, if you make a claim about something, one of the first questions you should ask is compared to what, right? So let's take that first. So compared to regular sugar sweetened beverages, right? Most people, if they're trying to do a Diet Coke, for example, or a Coke Zero or whatever it is, they're doing that because they don't want to consume the sugar sweetened version of that, right? So what does the research data say about that? Well, if you look at the human randomized control trials, it's very clear. People who sub out sugar sweetened beverages for non-nutritive sweetened beverages lose a significant amount of body weight, body fat, and get improved markers of metabolic health. Some people will say, well, why not just drink water? And I've got nothing against water. I think water's great. Absolutely. But again, like, shoot the alligator closest to the boat, right? So some people, when they hear messaging like, well, diet soda is just as bad for you as regular soda, they don't go, oh, I'll drink water. They just go, well, I'll just drink regular soda then.
Yeah.
Right? And if we look at the research data, even if they've actually done a comparison with diet drinks versus sugar sweetened beverages versus water. And the group that subs in the diet drinks loses more weight and more body fat than the group that drinks water. Now, those sweeteners are not fat burners, right? So what's happening is those people are just eating less calories. So I think what tends to happen is if people just drink water, they're probably pursuing that sweet taste somewhere else and subbing it in somewhere else. Yeah. Whereas if they're getting it through like a diet drink, maybe they're not pursuing that sweet taste trying to replace it. Yeah. And so I'm never going to argue against people drinking water. I think that's great. Like, I'm not saying you should drink diet sodas or diet drinks. What I'm saying is this is a useful tool. And why would we want to shame people for doing that? Especially when, again, the people may have the intention of, well, I just want people to drink water. But that's not what happens in the real world. What happens in the real world is people go, well, if they're just as bad, I'll just drink regular soda because it tastes better.
Yeah. And unfortunately, what you said, saying that in that study, in that group where people that drank the diet soda compared to regular soda compared to water, they still lost more weight and had better health signs than the group drinking water. Today's world could take a clip from this podcast and say, Layne Norton said, if you drink diet soda rather than water, you're going to be a healthier person. Right. And it's so messed up. And I think that the important thing that for some reason people of the internet cannot do is take things with a grain of salt and take things that are applicable to their life and not think that it's a generalized piece.
It's all, people want hot takes. They want black and white. It's easier for the human brain. The reality is that everything comes with a thread of nuance, and there are very few things in life that are black and white. And one of my favorite quotes also is, there's no solutions, there's only trade-offs, right? Now, what would be like if I was forced to say, what are some of the downsides to like some of these diet drinks? Well, maybe for some people, I have heard anecdotally people say this, the research data doesn't back it up, but research doesn't pick out individual data points. It's reporting averages. Some people say, well, when I have that sweet taste, it makes me crave more. Okay, well, in that case, don't have it, right? Like, that's fine. You don't need to have it. And there is some evidence that some of these sweeteners like sucralose may change the gut microbiota. So the gut microbiome may shift based on some of these sweeteners. Now, what's important to point out is we don't know enough about the gut microbiome to say definitively whether it's a bad thing or not. And I'll give you an example. There was a study where they gave people who had never had sucralose, and they saw gut microbiome shift. And the kind of conclusion of that was we should be worried about this. But when I looked up some of the species of bacteria that increased in response to sucralose, one of them actually produces more butyrate and is associated with people having better body composition, lower rates of obesity, and better metabolic health. So based on that, you could actually argue, and I'm not arguing this, but I'm saying you could make an argument that sucralose actually makes your gut microbiome better. I'm not ready to say that because we don't have nearly enough data to be able to make those sort of claims. What I'm saying is you have a hard time convincing me that if somebody, you have a hard time convincing me that if somebody subs in diet drinks and loses 10, 20, 30 pounds, that somehow now they're more unhealthy than they were if they had just kept that weight on. I don't think that. I think that the research data is pretty clear that they get healthier. Now, if they can do that with water, great. But why are we going to shame a great possible tool for people to use?
Yeah, I agree 100%. So where does the claim come from that it causes cancer? Sucralose causes cancer? Because that's something that's in my comments a lot.
Yeah.
Is, oh, the sucralose causes cancer. You really shouldn't use this, blah, blah, blah. And so where does that come from?
Yeah, sucralose, aspartame, a lot of people will say this. So when you're looking at research data with cancer, one of the things you have to keep in mind is we can't really do randomized control trials looking at who develops cancer, because cancer develops over 10, 20, 30 years. It's a very long exposure period. And so what we have to do is we look at what we call cohort data, where we look at people who consume more or less of something and then look at what their incidence of disease development is. The problem with that is people don't usually do things in isolation. So for example, people who drink diet sodas in cohort studies are actually more likely to be obese. Now you could take that and say, well, that means diet sodas make people obese. No, what that data actually says is people who are obese are more likely to attempt dieting, therefore more likely to consume diet drinks. And it is a reverse causality. And the reason it's important to distinguish between these type of studies is randomized control trials. The people are not self-selecting what they're doing. They are randomly assigned to groups. And so those possible intrinsic differences between people, you can assume that they will be randomly distributed across those groups. And then any difference that you see between the groups is due to the treatment, not due to inherent differences. So again, in a cohort study where you're just observing people, you're not actually telling them what to do. You're just observing. You can do those for 10, 20, 30 years. But trying to tell people, I mean, it's hard to get people to follow just taking a supplement for 8 weeks, trying to get them to eat a certain way for decades and like it's just not feasible. So when we look at the cohort data, that's what tends to get in the news. And this is where we have something called, I guess selection bias might not exactly be the right term, but the news disproportionately will report negative outcomes over positive outcomes because fear is a much more powerful motivator to watch and get your eyeballs on things. And I'll give you an example. So until 2020, because COVID kind of made things weird, violent crime was steadily decreasing. Quality of life was steadily increasing. We were basically, by any objective measurement, living in the best time to be alive in history, right? But you wouldn't know that from watching the news, right? What you would think is kids can't go outside. They're going to get kidnapped and, by pedophiles and whatnot, because you can always find an isolated story that's scary. Okay. So news will report negative stuff because they know it gets more eyeballs. So if a study comes out and shows, aspartame is not associated with cancer, you never hear about it. What you hear about in the news is new study says 20% increased risk of cancer with aspartame. Now, if you actually look at the research data, there's a tool out there called Consensus, which basically I'm on their scientific advisory board, and it's basically think ChatGPT combined with PubMed. And so you can type in a question and it will tell you, it will in seconds crawl PubMed and can tell you what percentage of studies say yes, no, or maybe, if you ask it a yes, no question. And if you type in, does aspartame cause cancer? 80% of the studies say no. And like 11% say yes. And they're mostly animal studies or the cohort studies I'm talking about. And then 9% say like maybe, right? So the vast majority say no. So why do people have this impression? Well, it's because, again, this is what winds up in the news. And let's take one of those studies, for example, a few years ago that got a lot of press, which was the Nutrisanti cohort study out of France. 100,000 people. I think they followed them for 20 years. And one of the take-homes was aspartame increased the risk of cancer by 17%. Now, when we report percentages in studies, it is a relative risk increase. What that means is if your absolute risk of cancer over a 20-year period is, say, 5%, it's not going from 5% to 22%. It's going from like 5% to just under 6%, right? So it's a relative risk increase. So like, let's say it's a 20% risk increase just for easy math, right? And the absolute risk is 5. That is a 5 to 6% increase because 1% absolute increase is 20% of 5%, right? Yep. So a lot of people don't know this, and it sounds much scarier than it really is.
Wow.
Now, the other part is I went into that study and I looked at the raw data, and they had 2 levels. They had people who didn't consume it, people who consumed low, moderate, or people who consumed high amounts of aspartame. And what was interesting is only the risk went up with the moderate intake and then went down for high intakes. And so one of the things you want to see in cohort studies to be convinced that something is causative is a dose response, because I'm not aware of any carcinogen that is carcinogenic at a moderate level and then not as carcinogenic at a high level, right? Yeah. And you don't see that. But like, let's take things we are convinced of. Smoking, very linear increased risk. Yep. LDL cholesterol, linear increased risk of cardiovascular disease. Dietary fiber, dose response decreased risk in cardiovascular disease and cancer. Those things are very, very consistent in the research data. Yeah. But like I said, most of these studies say that the sweeteners don't cause cancer, and the ones that do, the data is kind of all over the place.
Okay, fair enough. And so, I mean, to summarize that, honestly, consume whatever the hell you want to consume. Whatever makes you feel at peace with yourself and the way you live your life, consume whatever. But chances are you're probably not going to harm your health by consuming things like sucralose. You're probably gonna have a net positive over consuming, sucralose, like a Diet Coke versus a regular Coke, and a sugar-free caramel in our drink versus a regular caramel syrup in our drink. It's for me personally, and that's when I respond to a troll on the internet that's like, oh, this causes cancer. All I'll ever say is like, hey, if that's how you choose, if you choose to not consume it, that's fine. It's doing good for these people that are using my page as a resource to live a healthier lifestyle. Right. But it's also interesting you talked about kind of to transition the negative news getting the most attention. When it comes to social media, do you think that it's just as bad? Do you think that the negative things are getting the most attention on social media? Or do you think that there are still there's some positive light being shed? On my page, on my feed, I see mostly positive stuff. And so I'll be talking to someone in my daily life and they'll be like, oh, did you hear about, there's a squirrel. Did you hear about the squirrel named Peanut?
Oh yeah. The police came in New York.
They came and took his pet squirrel that he's had for 7 years, and then his pet raccoon, and they took him away for some sort of rabies thing, and then they fucking euthanized them. And this dude had this pet for 7 years. Anyways, I was talking to my girlfriend and she's like, did you hear about Peanut? And I was like, no, I didn't hear about it. My question was just, do you think that social media has any net positive?
I don't think anything's black and white. I think there's some good things about social media. I think there's also some really bad things about social media. I think the good thing is you can kind of curate what comes into your feed, right? And so one of the things I'll tell people is they'll be like, I mean, they say this more with the news, but they'll be like, the news is so negative. They never show any they don't care about what they show you. They care about your eyeballs. So if everybody tomorrow stood up and was like, you know what, I'm not going to watch this crap anymore until they start putting some positive stuff on, or until they start just reporting the stories and not making it fear-based. If everybody did that tomorrow, within a couple months, I promise you the entire news cycle would change, because they don't give a damn whether or not they're showing you positive or negative stuff. What they care about is getting your eyeballs on it, but they know, based on human behavior, that negative stuff will get a lot more eyeballs than positive stuff. And I mean, I even understand this with social media because, my debunks do a lot better than like straight up education most times. And so it's kind of like, people will say, why don't you just focus on your own stuff? I did for a long time. But, it's kind of like, I got to play the game a little bit. to try, but I'm trying to do that in a way that, okay, I get your attention, but now I'm also trying to educate you, right? So some people may argue, well, you're still doing negative. Maybe, but I also I can boo-hoo over human nature, or I can acknowledge what it is and try to fit things within the frame of what am I okay with, values wise, to, because if they're not going to watch my stuff, they're going to watch somebody else's stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of going on that same topic, what do you think is the key to longevity on social media? Because you've been on social media for a long time. So have I. And I mean, I have my own thoughts around it, but anyone that's a creator that has been around for a long time that I chat with, I like to talk to them and get to hear their take on what it takes to remain relevant for an extended period of time on social media.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is stop trying to go viral is what I would tell people. People get really focused on virality. I've never really had anything go truly viral. Okay. But I've been able to build a really solid following and an engaged following because I've been just brutally consistent. And I think a lot of that is just one, paying attention to what content does well, right? So I tell creators all the time, your social media gives you a lot of feedback, a lot of information. You can go to your insights and you can see what's working for you and what's not. And so, find out what's working and do more of that, but also be careful that the tail doesn't wag the dog. I've seen people where they'll see a certain type of post does really well for them. And then all of a sudden, all their content they do is the same thing, right? And you have to be careful about doing that. And also you have to be careful of just chasing engagement, because you can end up doing content that you don't even like, right? And I think part of what has been helpful for me is, for the most part, I enjoy the content I do. I enjoy filming educational stuff. I enjoy filming the debunks. I like doing, educational posts and memes, and, those are kind of my wheelhouse, mindset, motivation, training. I like doing all that stuff. And so I think that's been a big key for me. And the other thing is don't try to take on more than you can consistently do, because you'll burn yourself out. I've just seen so many people who have come in, gotten super popular, and it's I think one of the biggest curses you can have is just to blow up really fast. Yep. I think in some ways it's much better to have it go slow so you can kind of get adjusted to that. Because even me, it's an adjustment to I joke that I still think I'm 5 years behind where I am. So when I go out somewhere, I'm in a restaurant and somebody comes up to me, it's still kind of a weird thing for me, but it's if overnight that happened, that'd be really weird.
Right.
So I would say, just focus on the content you want to do and try to as foo-foo-y as this sounds, try to be true to yourself, because if you're doing stuff it doesn't feel authentic to you, it's going to be pretty draining on you. So I think do stuff you enjoy and try to find a segue where that segues with stuff that people are really into.
And you have to be pretty emotionally, maybe not detached would probably be the wrong word, but you have to be pretty level-headed emotionally to not let the lows affect you and to not let the highs affect you, right? Because I've experienced both, and if you let one of those take you in a certain direction, you're going to probably crash and burn out.
Well, and I think, don't read too much of your own press, positive or negative, right? You'll have, and I've been guilty of both of these things, where I've, thought I was king shit. And then I've also, read too much negative press where I'm oh, I am a piece of shit, And I think, just trying to make the ship relatively steady is important. Yeah. And so doing those things, I was talking to another creator who's a friend of mine, and they really get affected if they have a post that doesn't do well. They're in a bad mood for the rest of the day. And I want my stuff to do well, but you know, I'm not like distraught if it doesn't do well. It's just like, okay, I'm just going to keep plugging away. And if something doesn't do well, all right, let me think about why it didn't do well. And then let's try to get it better next time, you know? And I think James Smith had a really good, I don't know if you're familiar with him.
I know he is, yeah.
But he gave a talk at a seminar I was at, and he pulled up like his first Facebook and YouTube post. And he was like, look at this trash. And he's like talking about how bad it was, right? Yeah. And then he said, but this was necessary.
Yeah.
If I didn't do this, I wouldn't have learned. And I think there's a lot of people out there, they want to get it right the very first time. And it's like, no, like you, me, we're still trying to get it right, you know, still trying to find like what connects the most with our audience. But you can only do that through experience. And I think a lot of people just get kind of, if they're trying to do, you know, social media, they get kind of paralyzed by analysis. And then you get people who are like, oh, well, the algorithm and this.
Shadow banned.
Like,
bullshit.
Like,
your shit
people who complain about the algorithm, for the most part, my first thought is your content's just not good.
Yeah.
Or you're just not consistent.
Yep.
Does the algorithm favor certain things? Oh, of course it does. But, you know, I've done the stuff that I'm talking about. I've never, you know, I've never gone viral, and I still built a pretty good following doing it that way.
And regardless of whether or not the algorithm does do funky shit, you can't control it.
Exactly.
So why the hell focus on that? Why let it bother you? Man,
exactly.
Dude, social media is a weird place, but it's a great place. It's given me a life that I never thought I would have. But aside from social media, outside of being a powerlifter, outside of being extremely jacked, you're also a dad.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. So what has that experience been like for you?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably the most difficult thing I've ever done.
Yeah.
You know, like, nobody's really ready. I don't think anybody's really ready to be a parent. They might think they are. And I think one of the things that made me realize how difficult it was is, and I'm not saying that this is being a parent, but think about the worst day you've ever had. Okay. And what did you want to do? You probably just wanted to like be by yourself, read a book, play a video game, take a long hot shower, whatever, just something to like reset, right? When you're a parent, you still have to show up for other people because they still need what they need. You know, and it doesn't matter that you're having a bad day. It doesn't matter that you feel overwhelmed or, you know, and I think that's what makes it really tough is you still have to show up regardless of what's going on in your life. And to be honest, I had a lot of growing up to do when I became a dad. I still do in some ways. And I have at times about various things been a very selfish person. And I think being a dad has gotten me to be a little bit more self-reflective, think about how I show up and how that affects my kids. And, you know, like my son is nonverbal autistic. And so he has some unique challenges. And that's tough too, because, you know, I've had some people say some pretty nasty shit to me on social media about it, you know, to the point where I don't really post my kids anymore. And then my daughter is, you know, the opposite of him. She's like the most outgoing, gregarious, funny, loud human being in existence. I watch her and I'm like, whenever she does stuff that annoys me, I'm like, damn, shit's from me, you know? And so it really is this weird kind of thing where it's like, you're trying to keep enough of yourself that you still feel like you can fill your cup up. But then you're also, you know, trying to show up for these little humans that need you regardless of how you're feeling in a day. And yeah, I mean, I'm still trying to figure out how to get it right, you know, and it's been a big learning curve for me. And I would say, honestly, I had, for various reasons, had trouble really embracing fatherhood until probably the last few years. And, you know, but I'm just trying to show up as good as I can now and you know, be the best dad I can. But it definitely has been challenging for me.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. With stepping into that role and, really the last few years of you, as you said, you stepped into fatherhood even more so. Um, has that become more of your life's fulfillment? Has that become more of, do you feel like that has become more of your purpose here, maybe? Because I know a lot of people find purpose in their children. And so I'm just curious if that's something that is, I don't know, fulfilling or purposeful for you.
Yeah, I mean, it's fulfilling, especially when I see, like, my daughter and I were working on vocabulary last night, and she was really struggling with a couple words. And we kept going at it, kept going at it, kept going at it. And then she finally got it. And then, like, we were going over it this morning again on the way to school, and she had gotten it. And, she felt proud that she was able to do something that was difficult. And I felt proud that even though she was really frustrated at certain points, she kept sticking with it. And so I think, like, little stuff like that's, a really cool thing. Or, my son's, his check marks are going to be different than other kids. A few months back, we were at an arcade, which my daughter loves. And I forget what happened, but my son came up and he just, like, gave me a hug out of nowhere. And that's not something he usually does. And so, like, that was a very cool experience for me. And, like, those things are what, is very fulfilling. But it's kind of like, I always say, the greatest dichotomy in life is if something's easy, you don't value it. And for you to value it, it has to be difficult, right? So I was trying to actually explain this to my daughter when she was getting frustrated with something. I'm like, hey, honey, I know this is really frustrating, but I promise you the stuff that you will feel most proud of as you get older will be the stuff that was the hardest for you, that you kept going and didn't give up on. She's like, that doesn't make sense. And I'm like, I know it doesn't right now, but it will one day. I'm like, if you just were good at everything you tried and won every single time, there's a saying, if you eat lobster every day, it tastes like soap, right? So, like, you can't get the good stuff without the bad stuff and the frustration and all that. And so, I think that's one of the hardest parts of being a parent, is knowing that sometimes loving your kids well is letting them struggle and not intervening. And that's probably the hardest part.
Yeah. Well, dude, I feel like we are just about to, like, crack open a door here, but I know you're kind of short on time, and we're cutting it really close to where you're gonna have to dip out. So before we do close out and conclude, if you were standing next to your 21-year-old self,
oh shit,
what are maybe one or two of the things that you would tell that younger version of yourself about life to put you at peace, or just what would you tell yourself 20 years ago?
Oh man. Slow down. Just stop rushing through things. I think some of the mistakes I've made are similar to what other people have made, which is, as somebody who, really embraced being a hard worker, taking on too much at one time, spreading myself too thin. And honestly, like, I was talking to a friend about this, like, we all cope, right? Like, we all find different ways to cope with life. And some people, it gets really destructive, right? Like, it's drugs, alcohol, gambling, sex addiction, those sorts of things. Some people, social media, like, everybody copes in a different way, right? And busyness is also coping, right? Sure. And it is one of the only things that you will not only be not shamed for, but rewarded for, right? And so I think as I look back, some of the problems in my life, or some of the things I've struggled with, were because instead of just stopping or slowing down, thinking through a problem, and then making a decision and going with it, I just tried to, like, plow through it, right? And then the other thing I would tell myself is, listen to this. It's okay to get input. It's okay to get opinions from other people, but you have to live with your decisions. Nobody else has to live with those. And I think I heard something one time, which was, if you needed to ask more than 2 people an opinion, you're just kind of looking to validate what you already want to do, right? Yeah. Like you're just looking for the answer that you want. Yep. And so, I think in many ways for a long period of time, there were certain things where I had good direction on and I was good at making decisions and sticking with them. And then I think I felt at times so overwhelmed by like all the decisions that I started outsourcing some of my decision making to other people in my life. And that has not done me a good service, because at the end of the day, I think part of it is, like, if I want to psychoanalyze myself, a little bit of a protection mechanism where it's like, well, if it's this person said to do this and I do it and it doesn't work out, well, then they said to do it. You know what I mean? Like, it's kind of, but at the end of the day, like, they don't have to live with the results of those decisions. I have to live with the results of those decisions. And so I think at least if, you make a bad decision or a wrong decision, at least if it's your decision, you can fully own it, And so slow down, make your own decisions. I think that's what I go back and tell my 20-year-old self.
Wow. Dude, I love that. I think that's a great way to close things out. I know for a fact that I'll need to have you on another episode just because I feel like we were literally about to unlift the veil on a really, really great conversation, and we're running on limited time today. So Layne, man, thank you just for showing up, for making some coffee with me, having this short conversation and letting me into your life a little bit. And if you want to find Layne, I'll drop all his socials in the notes and everything like that. But again, dude, thank you for coming to the Tailgate Coffee Table, and hopefully, we can do this in the future again.
Yeah, man. And thanks for the coffee.
Cheers, brother.
Cheers.